Donald Trump, less than a week into his latest term as president, is already embarrassing the United States on a global stage. Our oldest and closest ally, the United Kingdom, is preparing for an important conversation between Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. However, the build-up to this meeting underscores the widespread skepticism about Trump's ability to govern effectively and diplomatically. According to a report by The Independent, journalists reached out to staff members of former UK Prime Ministers Theresa May and Boris Johnson to gain insight into what these high-level conversations with Trump were like. Their accounts? Utterly humiliating for Trump and, by extension, the United States. Both sets of staff revealed that these conversations were often met with laughter as they witnessed Trump's inability to focus, lack of understanding, and constant derailment of critical discussions. In the lead-up to such meetings, it's standard practice for the staff of both leaders to collaboratively create an agenda to ensure the call stays on track. During the actual conversation, these staff members remain in the room to provide real-time support and additional information, if necessary. Yet, as described by UK officials, Trump repeatedly failed to adhere to any agenda. Instead, he would ramble about unrelated topics, such as his golf properties in Scotland, his personal opinions about the Queen, or trivial matters that had no bearing on the critical issues at hand. UK staffers found it astonishingly difficult to keep Trump on topic. Time and again, they had to remind him that certain issues, like ongoing legal cases or parliamentary votes, were off-limits. But Trump either couldn't or wouldn't grasp these boundaries. The recurring theme, according to these former staffers, was that Trump lacked the focus or knowledge required to engage in meaningful diplomatic conversations. To them, these calls were less about progress and more about enduring Trump's blunders, something they reportedly found hysterically funny. This isn't a new phenomenon. The global humiliation caused by Trump's actions is a pattern that the world remembers all too well. His behavior in past interactions with other nations ranged from bizarre to outright dangerous. One particularly infamous example involved his attempt to threaten Panama over the Panama Canal. Trump demanded special treatment for the United States, even though the canal is governed by a treaty that mandates equal treatment for all countries. When Panama refused, Trump escalated his rhetoric, only for Russia, yes, Russia, to step in and remind him to back down. The entire ordeal was a diplomatic disaster that ended with Panama mocking Trump and standing firm against his bullying. Then there was the Greenland debacle. In 2019, Trump floated the idea of the U.S. purchasing Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory under Denmark's sovereignty. The suggestion was met with universal ridicule. Danish officials, including former Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen and Greenland's own government, dismissed the idea as absurd. The situation reached a peak when a Danish minister addressed Trump directly on the floor of the European Parliament, stating, "Greenland is not for sale, and let me put it in words you might understand. Mr. Trump, F*** off." This incident became yet another example of Trump's inability to navigate diplomacy with any seriousness or tact. Canada, one of our closest neighbors and allies, wasn't spared from Trump's antics either. Trump made bizarre comments about Canada becoming the 51st state, a remark that infuriated Canadians across the political spectrum. Even the conservative opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, dismissed Trump's statements and reaffirmed Canada's sovereignty with a firm rebuttal. Trump's threats of tariffs against Canada and Mexico during his presidency were also met with defiance. Mexico's leadership even dared Trump to impose those tariffs, knowing full well the economic consequences would backfire on the United States. China's response to Trump's tariff threats during his trade war was equally dismissive. Despite his claims of being a master negotiator, Trump's bluster had little impact on Beijing. Chinese officials shrugged off his threats, knowing that their economy was strong enough to withstand his tactics while the U.S. economy would bear significant consequences. Trump's approach, which he touted as the art of the deal, proved to be anything but. Instead, It exposed his inability to think strategically or consider the long-term implications of his actions. Even in matters of military and geopolitical strategy, Trump's recklessness created chaos. He repeatedly threatened to deploy troops to the Mexican border, a move that Mexican officials dismissed as a hollow show of force. In Russia's case, Trump's handling of the Ukraine conflict showcased his lack of understanding and his willingness to side with autocrats. By blaming Ukraine for the war and suggesting they should have surrendered to Russia, Trump undermined the very principles of sovereignty and international law that the U.S. is supposed to uphold. Now, as Trump prepares to engage with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the expectations are already abysmally low. The UK, like the rest of the world, hasn't forgotten Trump's past blunders. They remember his inability to stay focused, his lack of understanding of international affairs, and his tendency to prioritize his personal interests over critical diplomatic matters. The world is laughing, not out of joy, but out of disbelief that someone so fundamentally unqualified could once again represent the United States on the global stage. This is not just embarrassing, it's dangerous. Leadership matters, especially in a world where conflicts like the war in Ukraine could escalate into larger regional or even global confrontations. Stability and clarity are paramount, and Trump's erratic behavior undermines both. His ignorance and arrogance make him a liability, not just for the U.S., but for the world. While Trump and his supporters may live in a bubble of delusion, the reality is starkly different. The world sees Trump for what he is, an incompetent leader who's out of his depth. His inability to govern effectively or earn respect on the world stage leaves the United States vulnerable and isolated. This is a moment that demands serious leadership, and unfortunately, Trump has already proven he's incapable of rising to the occasion. The stakes are too high to ignore the consequences of Trump's return to power. His actions have already humiliated the nation repeatedly, and the world hasn't forgotten. The laughter that echoes in foreign capitals isn't just about Trump. It's about the decline of American credibility under his watch. And that's a legacy none of us can afford.